My name is Guy Odishaw, and I'm one of the Sunday morning service leaders. I'm here the second Sunday every other month, and I've been doing a series of talks on spiritual development, and we've been kind of working through some of the principles, kind of the foundational principles for spiritual practice. Last time I was here, I spoke about brahmacharya, which maybe an easy way to say that is we become what we meditate on, or we are what we think. Is another way to say it. And this is something that's common throughout the traditions. This idea of what's in our mind is really, who we are and how we will live our life. And the idea of brahmacharya is to give one's attention to the divine, to spirit, in every moment. So it's again one of the foundational principles of today. We're going to take on the next one, and apagraha is the Sanskrit word for the principle we're going to look at today. Apagraha, and this is kind of non-attachment, non-grasping, non-possessiveness, non-greed. This is thought about in a more material way. We think of it as not being possessive. And as I was kind of pondering this talk this morning, the most kind of extreme example I could think of was, the TV show Hoarders. Has anybody watched that show? Gary, you haven't seen it? Oh, you got to take a moment. Hoarders. Yeah, I mean, I can't actually watch the show myself, but it can be difficult. Yeah, my wife is a fan, and so every now and again I'm subjected to moments of it. But it's clearly extreme, but it's a great place to see this in a very external, exaggerated way, and in so to see the suffering that it causes the person who is the victim of it, but also the people around them. How the activity of hoarding affects family and neighbors and friends, and just this ripple effect of it. And so it's a good example to be able to see that happens and the seriousness of it, and then to bring that to ourselves and to look at our more subtle forms of it. Chances are none of us are going to be on that show, but there is some way in which we're enacting that, even if it's in a subtle way. And so again, we take it from material objects and kind of the hoarding of material objects, extend that to money. Money's a big one where we can have a lot of kind of attachment around. We want to take it more subtle than that, so not just subtle in the sense of less exaggerated. I maybe have 6 newspaper articles that I've kept versus somebody who has kept every newspaper for the last 60 years, right? Big difference. But then I could look even in my own way with those 6 that I have. I can look and see, well, what is my attachment to them? Why have I moved them the last 3 times that I've moved? Yet they just live in a file, but it seems important to me that they make every move. Right? So we can look at it from the more subtle being just less, but I also want to take it, the subtle. Out of the physical and into kind of the emotional, mental realm. So into the realm of mind, and that's what I mean by more subtle. So not so much in the external world, in the gross material realm, but bringing this idea and inquiry into our interior realm, in the realm of mind, and where are we, kind of grasping there. So there's a book written a number of years ago by an author that goes by the name Ishmael, and it was on the leavers and the takers was the kind of the two characters in the story, right? And the idea of the leavers in the book were given more the indigenous people who only took what they needed and had this idea of the preservation of the ecosystem, the environment for future generations, and had it as a principle to always try and give back more than what you took, but at the very least a balance of the two, and that was a principle in which life was based on. And then we could say, civilization were the takers, the ones that just consumed and consumed and consumed and consumed without any notion of boundaries or the ecosystem or others or nature, any of it. It's just mine for the having and future? What? It's an eternal now, right? So these two ideas kind of played off against one another. And it was interesting to me, we saw some of that language come out in the presidential, in the run-up to the election. You heard some of the language of the takers, right? And we might remember hearing a clip of Romney talking about the 47%, kind of the moocher class, that whole kind of idea. And it was in that context that this idea of takers was being used to talk about a segment of society that was being painted in that particular way. So these are just some indications where these ideas come up in our current popular culture, that we have these ideas of kind of the lever and the taker, this idea that there is a too much, right? Although there's probably very broad disagreement on what too much is or what is enough, right? But there is this idea that there is a something there for some people, right? Some people don't feel that there's that at all, but for many there is this idea of what is enough, and I think that's the most important thing. Not necessarily that one has an answer to that one has the notion that there is this thing called enough, and it matters, and it should be looked into. And I think that's the most important thing, because it really, if you just call it a rule, it becomes arbitrary, and the principle is lost. And the principle is what is most important, right? And to bring this, I want to bring it today kind of closer to home, and in a little bit here, we're going to do some exercises to kind of look into where this is hanging out in us. And so I want to narrow it down a little bit to some more specifics that we can work on. It's a pretty broad topic and arises really everywhere in our life, but everywhere and everything is a bit difficult to work on. So we're going to narrow it down to some smaller places. So I'm thinking of a couple of quotes. One is from Gandhi. He said that there is enough in the world for need, but not enough for greed. And this was a speaking to this principle and trying to goad people into this kind of thinking. Right? In the Bible, in Psalms 23, it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I will not want. And there again, kind of speaking to this idea there, want being this sense of the need, the greed, that I have to get and acquire for myself, because that principle cuts right against faith, right? And another way in which we kind of I don't know. So another one of the principles of this non-attachment, this non-grasping, is the principle of delusion. And so a place that comes out is, have you ever said to yourself or to a friend, or had somebody say to you, it'll all work out okay? Right? Have you ever found yourself saying that to somebody? It's going to be okay, it's going to work out, right? Well, really, does it? I mean, for how many people does life work out well? If you think it's 7 billion people on the planet, how many people does it work out well for? I'm going to say not very many, actually. Very small percentage of the population actually get to live the life that they might imagine for themselves, how they want it to go, right? To be comfortable, pleasurable, to be abundant enough that there isn't lacking and wanting, to be healthy, to live to a ripe age, being fulfilled in the world, and kind of dying of natural causes, right? I mean, this is some idea. We all carry in us some fantasy of what our ideal life is, how it would go, right? And you can look in different cultures, and there's different way. And maybe here, since we live in this particular culture, we might have this idea of it's something of a middle class life or an upper middle class life, where you've got a house and 2 cars, and you've got the education that you need to have the job that you want, and your job is fulfilling and satisfying, and you're in a relationship that is fulfilling and satisfying, and your children are growing and they are becoming fulfilled and satisfied, and that is all kind of happening, and it's largely free of any suffering and full of fulfillment, right? I mean, we'd all have some version of that as a fantasy, right? But for how many people is it really working out that way? Right? But yet, we still have this sense, right, of it's going to work out, it's going to be okay. We feel it almost as like a promise, or a guarantee, or a certainty, or, to bring in one of my favorite words, hope. Right? We have the hope that it will. And that's contrary, really, to the reality, the larger reality. When we look out there and we actually look at it, there's very few people that you can find where that's been the case for them. Yeah? But yet we persist in it. I mean, it's constant. Yeah? So this is an example, right, of the grasping, the holding on to the idea that it's going to be okay, that it's going to work out. Right? So hope, in a way, hope epitomizes this. What is hope, really? The action of hope is, in a way, what hope draws us to do is to kind of discount what's happening now and project into the future and imagine a happier future, and then imagine the feelings of my happier future are happening now. Right? That's how hope works, right? It'll be better later. The fact of having the image of it being better later helps me kind of settle down and relax, and I don't feel so agitated or distressed about what's happening in the now. And so the hope keeps me in the future and out of the present. It keeps me in a fantasy and not in reality. And that is the epitome of what we're talking about here. Right? Hope is the function of the grasping. Right? So we've probably all used hope in various moments, and it has its purposes. I mean, nobody wants to just be anxious and depressed and hopeless and just so overwhelmed and beaten down by life that you can't get out of bed in the morning, right? That's not helpful. So hope can be a good remedy for that. But what I would say to you is there's another remedy. Right? There is another remedy, but we're not used to it. We haven't been taught how to use that as a remedy. We're taught hope, and hope is fairly easy and effective, and so we continue to use it. But there is another one, and that's simply truth. Right? To be able to be present to the truth and to feel how truth nurtures us and supports us. But we haven't really been taught that. And so truth often becomes just a burden. It weighs us down, and we go back to hope. So we want to explore this today. This is what we want to look into, is this idea of grasping, and where in me do I hold on to ideas, beliefs, these notions of how life should be, right? Like this one that I've given you. Life should be fair. Life should go well. It will work out, right? But I'm sure there are others that you were given maybe by your family of origin, kind of what was what I call the religion of the household. So not being an actual religion, but there was a belief system in the house of how the world is, how life goes, right? And that was maybe particularly positive or particularly negative. It was about, it's a jungle out there and you've got to take care of yourself. It's you against the world, right? That kind of idea. Or the world is a safe, benevolent place and it will help you and support you. And you can trust, you can rely on the world to take care of you, right? So these notions, right? I'm painting them in somewhat kind of black and white, but they're easier to see when we think about them in that way. But, your own situation was shades of gray, but it was impactful and formed up kind of this unconscious worldview, which then drives your relationship to life, to reality. And we cling to those. We cling to those because they are the foundations of our psyche. We don't know it. It's not a conscious thing, right? But who I am, who I take myself to be, if I were to say I, right? It includes those ideas, those fundamental, foundational ideas of how the world is, and then that drives how I am in the world. Right? So we don't allow ourselves to look at these very easily, and we don't allow ourselves to look at them in kind of a critical way. And when I say critical, I don't mean judgmental, like just saying, oh, you're a stupid head for thinking that, right? So not critical that way, but critical in the sense of, is it true? Is that really true? Now that I'm an adult, does what my father told me when I was 6, and I took to be true and have lived on the basis of it, now that I'm 44, I look at that and say, is it true? Does the 44-year-old guy really believe that? Does that match with what I see happening in the world? And if not, well, that can become really threatening. It means giving up a part of myself. And generally, I'm attached to me. I like me. Me got me here, right? I see me getting myself wherever I'm going. So I don't give up a sense of myself easily. So this kind of self-work is very difficult, right? It is, sometimes I think of it as like the power that is in a like in an atom, right? So the nuclear bond, right? And we know what happens, right? When the nuclear bond is broken, right? You get a nuclear bomb, and they're quite destructive, or you get nuclear power, which provides a great deal of energy. So there's a lot of strength in that nuclear bond, and it takes a lot to break it. And when you do break it, it releases a lot of energy. So I think of it, same thing here. These things that we take to be ourself, so they're, kind of to use some jargon, it's ego-syntonic, right? It is a part of you. To break that bond, to take it apart, to break it off of you, takes a great deal of energy to do that. And it releases a great deal of energy. And that release of energy is what we use for transformation, right? That is the energy that fuels our transformation, or how we mature as beings, as souls, right? But first, we have to invest the energy to break the bonds. And then harness that energy for transformation, because there's no guarantee that release of energy is going to go well for you, right? That would be a naive promise if I said, well, trust me, it'll go well. It will go. That's for sure. But how well it will go, this is why spiritual work is done typically in a community with a teaching and a method and a teacher, because all of that optimizes that energy that's released will work for you and not against you, that it'll be constructive and not destructive. Right? So we don't want to take our kind of naive optimism and our hope into our spiritual practice, right? Because that doesn't serve us there any better than it serves us in the world. Right? So we want to look into this idea of kind of grasping, attachment, clinging. What am I holding on to? What am I clinging to in my inner self, my beliefs, my worldviews, my ideas of how life is, how I am, how the world is, how reality is, what's the truth? We want to look into that. So we're going to break up into,
Question.
Please.
Eternal truths?
Mm-hmm.
Have you, I've turned around and listened to eternal truths for probably 30 years, and I go back to them on a regular basis.
Yeah. So can you give me an example of an eternal? Impermanence, yes.
Learn to forgive yourself again and again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The river flows by itself. You can't push it.
Yes.
And though I'm going to have to think, but there's probably about 30 of them on this list. And I grabbed it someplace along my journey, and I enjoy sharing those truths with people sometimes, and students.
Yeah.
It really has, and thank you for kind of just all of a sudden the light bulb went on. Okay, that's why I go back to those.
Right.
They help.
They do.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is great. Thank you for saying this, for bringing this up. So we'll take, for example, the first one you said, the impermanence, right? So this is true. But here's where we want to catch ourselves. Just like I mentioned about the hope, and hope is a way that I avoid the pain of the truth of the now that I'm using hope to not feel, right? So I use it as a medication. So we can do the same thing with these eternal truths. The ego can use them as what's called a substitute satisfaction, right? As a way to not feel or to buffer or insulate myself from the suffering that I'm feeling in the moment. And where one might wholeheartedly argue, how could that be a good thing? How is that not a good thing, Guy? How is it not good if it helps me, right? If it helps people who are suffering not suffer, how could we say anything but good things about that.
One that just came to my mind.
Yes.
Is you only get to keep what you give away.
Yes.
And I use that again and again and again, and it just feels so good.
Mm-hmm.
That something that I value, I give it to someone. And then I know where it's at.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I joke about that thing,
Yeah.
you know. And there's another one, and I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but it's something about like the process of giving a gift to someone, and they have no idea kind of where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's the truth, but that kind of ties into you know, you keep what you give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So we'll stick with just a couple of them, or else we'll get weighed down by all 30 of them in the moment, and we just want to pick one and then see its effect on us, right? So here's kind of how it goes. I'm an ego, and so my perspective on reality is limited, and it's egocentric. It's about me. So when something happens in life that my ego doesn't like, I don't get what I want. So I'll take, for example, for myself, I had a wonderful, wonderful home. I loved it. I was very attached to it. And it really propped up my self-image. I very much liked this house, right? And wanted to renegotiate my mortgage, hired an attorney, turned out to be a really bad attorney, ended up losing my house, right? Bad situation, very painful, right? And I suffer that because of my attachment to it. And it also cost me a great, great deal of money, which apparently I was very attached to. So I could say to myself that it is, impermanence. All things come and go. It was my attempt to try and own it or possess it, right? And so I could say, well, yep, sure enough, there it is. This is an eternal truth. I was going for permanence in a world of impermanence. But if I take that truth only as a way to kind of make myself feel better in the moment, be like, oh, yeah. I don't actually get down into the place where my attachment was, right? I avoid the suffering. The suffering is the path to the cause of the suffering. Right? The suffering is the doorway. If I use eternal truths to medicate my suffering, I close the door to my own liberation. All right? And so this is where those kinds of spiritual truisms, right? This is where they don't serve us. So it doesn't mean that they're not true or they're not valuable or valid, but in doing spiritual work, we want to be really, really, really careful on how we self-medicate. Because our wound is our entry point to our liberation. The wound is the place of the mistaken identity that I am a limited, finite being that can be hurt. Right? That's the mistake. I feel the mistake in that I felt a lot of things, betrayed by life. It's not fair, Who is this knucklehead who comes along and lies to me and gets away with it scot-free, and now I want revenge on him, and I want revenge on the bank, and I'm angry, and all of this is happening. All of this is happening because I take myself to be a limited, finite being, an ego, adrift in the midst, who has to somehow survive, right? So the wounds are the entry point into that. If I close them, then I cut off the very place I need to be doing my work. So this is what I would say about the list of 30 eternal truths. They have their place. And it's not that they're not true. It's that from a place of self-work, when we're doing personal growth, right, is we don't want any medication. Right? Our suffering, what they call in the traditions, tapas, the heat. Right? We need that. That nuclear bond that I was talking about breaking, right? It is never pleasurable. It is never experienced as fun. It's a little bit like, so I often will use the example, like just from my own experience, of feeling like I'm being filleted, or eviscerated, right? So if you can imagine, right, like fillet fish, take them and cut them open, and you gut them and you peel them and then you slice them thin, right, and you fillet the fish. So imagine having that done to you while you're alive, right? This is the kind of thing that I'm talking about, right? This is how it feels. But we need that. We need to harness the energy of that if we have any hope of letting go of the mistaken identity of what we've taken ourselves to be, to move into the truth of what we are. Right? So let's see if we can do that. Let's see if any of you can get to the point of feeling eviscerated today. It'll be fun. So we're going to do a couple of repeating questions. So if you have something to write on, you can write these down. And if you don't, I will tell them to you again, and maybe you'll end up with a partner who has written them down. But for those of you who have something to write on. So the first question is, tell me a way you are grasping. Tell me a way you are grasping. And the second question will be, what is right about hoping? What is right about hoping? So I put these, in the question of the, for example, tell me a way you are grasping. So it is to put it into the immediacy of the moment. Right? So one way to answer this question is literally to notice, like right now, how am I grasping in this moment? Yeah. Sure. Yep. So grasping, attachment. So being attached to something, the wanting, the energy of the hoarding, the holding on to, the possessiveness. Is that going to give you a little? Kind of, although if you think of it, attachment seems kind of, it's a little cold. The word itself is like a little detached, a little objective. Or grasping is a little bit more the sense of grasping, It's a little more visceral. And so I'm wanting you to be in that way. In a way, with these questions, we kind of want to let the question go to work on you. And so if what comes up when your partner says, tell me a way you're grasping, and your response is, I don't know, I don't understand the question, perfect answer, right? With these questions, it is not an intellectual exercise and a test to see if you can come up with a list of ways in which you are grasping. Always with inquiry, it is about being present to what's arising in your experience in the moment. That's the alchemy, the magic of inquiry is presence. So the more you can be present to yourself in the moment, that's the alchemy. Now, it happens to be that we're kind of sculpting the moment a little bit. We're structuring the moment with the question and the whole talk So it is true, you're being primed in a particular way. But allow yourself to show up with all of your faculties. The felt sense of your body. How does being asked this question affect your body in the moment? So some of your partner will ask you, tell me a way you're grasping. Say, God, I feel that as a knot here, like right in my guts. It just turned tighter as you were asking the question each time. Thank you. Tell me a way you are grasping. I don't know, but this gripping in the back of my neck, I feel like my head just topple over backwards and fall off. Thank you. Tell me a way you're grasping. And like that, right? So you're just answering from where you are. There'll be all kinds of forces trying to mess with you during the exercises. Notice them, name them, answer the question to the best of your ability in the moment, and let the work on you. Yeah? So we'll do it for all time for you, so you guys don't have to worry about the time. We'll do it for, let's see if we go we can go 3 minutes for each person. So you ask for 3, then you'll answer for 3, and then we'll do the second question for 3 and 3, and we'll come back and we'll wrap up. Okay, so everybody got the questions? And if you need them, you can ask me. I can read them off to you again while we're doing the exercise. So grab a partner and find a place where you have a little bit of space. And the goal here, is to keep kind of the social aspect to a minimum. So when the person is asking you the question, you're not nodding and commenting or encouraging them or giving them some kind of like shame face or something, right? You're being present and just aware. Ask the question. When they answer, you say thank you. You ask the question again. They answer. You say thank you, and on for 3 minutes.